Hello guys and girls, and welcome to today's bell ringer video. I'm sure at this point in the year you are probably kind of sick of hearing teachers talk about this, but facts are facts, and the end of the year is very quickly approaching. So much so that we actually are starting our KSA testing with the survey on Friday of this week, and then with all of the other tests that we have to take next week. So the clock is ticking, and as I'm sure you are doing in a lot of your classes, we are going to be spending some time this week continuing to review the things that are important and the things that we want to make sure are in the forefront of our minds as we take that assessment. One of the things that's going to be super helpful and super important as you are taking your KSA test is to remember the ABEE writing strategy. When you are completing your reading test, any question that you come across that requires you to write, you should be using the ABEE writing strategy. It does not matter if the prompt says that it's a short answer question or if the prompt says that it is an extended response question. You should be using what you know about ABEE to answer those questions. So with that being said, today very quickly, and I promise this is the last time that we're going to go over this, but we are going to review the steps of ABEE and look at an example of an ABEE together. So quickly, let's review. What does ABEE stand for? At this point in the year, you should be able to tell me this in your sleep. The A in ABEE stands for answer the question. So the very first thing you have to do is answer what the question is asking you. And then the B stands for because. So after you answer the question, you are providing some reasoning for your answer. And we should expect to see the word because or something similar in your response. Then we have our first E in ABEE, which is our E1, and that stands for evidence. So that's where you are pulling evidence from the provided passage to support your answer. And then the second E in ABEE is our E2, which we know stands for explain. So if we put it all together, we've got answer because, E1, which is evidence, E2, explain, and then we know, because we've talked about it all year long, that you're actually going to repeat the E1 and the E2 again. So after your first E1 and E2, you're going to give me an internal transition, and then your second E1 and E2. We are going to look at an example of this, and this passage should look very familiar to you because this was actually the passage that you all read on Friday during our writer's workshop, and you were asked to write a body paragraph, which is very similar to the way that we structure an ABEE. So just to refresh your memory, we are going to read this passage quickly together. It is called Should He Get Paid? And it says, college sports bring in billions of dollars a year, but the athletes who play them don't get a penny. Is that fair? Follow along with me. It was February 20th, 2019, and the basketball game between Duke University's Blue Devils and University of North Carolina's UNC Tar Heels was about to begin. The stands were packed and the fans were pumped. Tickets for the game had almost reached Super Bowl prices. One ticket went for a whopping $10,652. Duke and UNC have a long-standing and super intense rivalry, but that was only part of the excitement. The other part? Duke player Zion Williamson. At 6 feet 7 inches and 285 pounds, bigger than most NBA players, Williamson, 18, is unlike any player college basketball has ever seen. On the court, he is as graceful as a dancer and as powerful as a freight train. His sky-high jumps and show-stopping slam dunks have earned him millions of fans. He's often compared to Michael Jordan and LeBron James. You might think that this teenage prodigy is raking in the big bucks, but in fact, he doesn't make a cent. All the money that the Blue Devils bring in goes to Duke, not to Williamson or to any other player. That's because, according to the National Collegiate Athletic Association, college athletes are not allowed to be paid. But should they be? College sports, particularly basketball and football, are a very big business involving very large amounts of money. Ticket sales are just one slice of the pie. A top team can secure lucrative endorsement deals. For example, Nike pays Duke millions to outfit its players in Nike gear, essentially turning the players into walking advertisements. Top college teams can also help increase their school enrollments and bump up donations from alumni. And then there's the money from TV deals and merchandise like hats and sweatshirts. So, if these teams bring in so much money, why don't the players get any of it? After all, without the players, there wouldn't be any teams. The thing is, colleges don't just make huge amounts of money, they also spend a huge amount. Stadiums are not cheap. Neither are the equipment and team travel, not to mention coaches' salaries and scholarships for student athletes. According to a 2014 NCAA study, only 24 of the top 129 college football programs make a profit. Some say that forcing schools to pay athletes could do more harm than good. If players were paid, many schools might not be able to afford to keep their athletic programs running. They'd certainly have less money for sports like swimming, cross country, gymnastics, and soccer, sports that don't bring in the kind of money that football and basketball do. Why should the students who play these sports have to suffer for the benefit of a few? Then again, top coaches make millions. Is it fair for them to make so much while the athletes themselves get nothing? After all, being a college athlete can be like working a full-time job while also going to school. A 2006 NCAA study found that the top-tier college athletes dedicate an average of 37 hours per week to their sport. On the other hand, it's not quite accurate to say that college athletes get nothing. Many get tuition scholarships. Top athletes even get completely free educations, often with housing and food costs included. They may also get free access to trainers and tutors. Plus, college players get coaching, experience, and exposure that can set them up for success if they pursue professional careers in their sport. What's more, if young athletes want to get paid to play, they do have options. For example, they can join a professional league overseas. Soon, elite high school basketball players will also have the chance to earn $125,000 a season in the NBA's minor league, and potentially go straight from there to the pros. And for the extraordinary athletes like Williamson, college is often only a brief stopover before they are old enough to go pro anyway. Currently, the NBA requires players to be at least 19 years old and a year out of high school. Then again, fewer than 2% of college athletes go on to have professional careers. As for the rest, some may look back and notice that while their school got a lot from them, they didn't get much from their school. Some college athletes are also so busy with their sport that they don't have enough time or energy to devote to their studies. As a result, they may fall behind or even drop out. Would paying athletes really help though, or would it make things worse? Some say that paying college athletes would turn them into employees, and isn't the whole point of college to be a student and get an education? As for Williamson, his future in the NBA seems certain. That is, of course, unless something unforeseen, like a career-ending injury, should happen. That awful possibility surely crossed many minds when 30 seconds into the big Duke-UNC game in February, his left sneaker suddenly fell apart, causing Williamson to fall and sprain his knee. Fortunately, the injury was not too serious, and Williamson took a few weeks off and then returned to the court ready to dazzle his fans, but not to get paid. Let's pretend that you were asked to read that passage and then you were given this question. Should college athletes be paid? Explain why or why not. Now again, on Friday you had a very similar question to this, but in that instance you were asked to write a body paragraph, and today we are asked to use the ABEE writing strategy. Remember, the first step of ABEE is to restate and answer the question. So if I was going to do that, my response might look something like this. College athletes should be paid. Or I could also say college athletes should not be paid. Those are the only two options in this scenario, but for the sake of this answer, we're going to argue that college athletes should be paid. Now that we've restated and answered the question, the next step of ABEE is to give a reason, and we are going to do that by using the word because. So I stated college athletes should be paid because they help to generate large amounts of money for their schools. I want you guys to notice how we stated the why or because, but nothing else. So I didn't go into a ton of detail here because I'm going to save all of my details for my E1s and my E2s. I simply restated the question and offered a brief reason for why I feel that way. After your first answer and because, or after your answer and your because, you're going to jump into your first E1. Remember, E1 stands for evidence, so this is the point where we're going to go back to the text and we're going to find something that the author stated that supports our answer. Whenever we are inserting our E1, we have to remember to have a good sentence starter, such as the text states. And I am using quotation marks because I'm citing this directly from the text. College sports, particularly college basketball and football, are a very big business involving a very large amount of money. And then I have my closing quotation marks. After my first E1, I'm going to jump into my E2, which is my explanation. I want you guys to remember that your E1 comes from the text, your E2 comes from your brain, and it is in your own words. So now I'm going to take this evidence and I'm going to explain how it supports my belief that college athletes should be paid. College teams bring thousands of dollars to their universities each year. Ticket sales and merchandise alone generate huge amounts of income. Shouldn't the athletes get a small percentage of this money? After my first E1 and E2, remember we're always going to go back and do another E1 and E2. The text also says, I have my quotation marks, a top team can secure lucrative endorsement deals. For example, Nike pays Duke millions to outfit its players in Nike gear. And then I have my closing quotation marks. And now I'm going to provide another explanation. Remember, our E2s need to be at least 2 sentences, and our E2s, again, are going to be in our own words. Millions of dollars just for wearing a specific brand name. It doesn't seem fair for all of this money to go straight to the university without a penny given to the athletes. Then we're going to wrap things up with a concluding sentence. Remember, the job of the concluding sentence is to bring your paragraph to a close. So I said, these young people deserve to be paid for all of the hard work they do to excel in their sport. I'm not going to read through this entire response again, but I did want you to see what it looks like when you put it all together. Remember, we answer the question, then we give our because, then we cite our first piece of evidence with a good sentence starter like the text says, and we have quotation marks because this is cited directly from the text. Then we have our E2, which is 2 sentences in our own words explaining our evidence. Then we have our next E1 with a good sentence starter like the text says. If I was being really picky here, honestly, I should have included an internal transition, but I forgot that. So remember, you can use an internal transition between your first E1 and E2 and your second E1 and E2 to help move between the ideas. But for my second E1, I have a good sentence starter. The text also says, I have my quotation marks. Then I have another E2 explaining my evidence. And then we wrap it all up with a concluding sentence. Again, I know that some of you all are probably sick of all this review, but we're just trying to make sure we have everything locked in before we start our testing next week. And again, just remember, if you have any type of writing question as you are taking your reading test, this is the expectation. You are expected to use the ABEE writing strategy. You all have worked super hard on this year, so I know you're going to do great, but I think it's always a good idea for a little bit of review.